The bill was never about dinner. It was about the 15 years I spent paying for a life my wife had learned to mock. That night, the rooftop restaurant above downtown Chicago glowed like it had been built for people who never had to check a balance before ordering wine. Glass walls looked out over the city, every table dressed in white linen, every candle burning low and expensive, every server moving like they had been trained not to hear the things rich people said after their third drink. It was our anniversary. 15 years. I had made the reservation 2 months earlier, asked for the corner table facing the skyline, and carried a small leather album in my jacket pocket, the kind with real printed photos because Madison used to say phones made memories feel disposable. I thought we were going to sit across from each other, talk honestly, maybe remember who we were before life turned us into two people sharing a mortgage and avoiding eye contact over coffee. Then she walked in with 6 people behind her. Blake Reynolds was one of them. Tall, polished, all teeth and confidence, wearing a navy suit that looked like it came with its own spotlight. Madison kissed my cheek like she was checking a box and said, "I hope you don't mind." Everyone wanted to celebrate with us. I did mind. I just didn't say it. Men like me get good at swallowing small disappointments before they become scenes. We sat down, and right away the dinner stopped belonging to us. Blake ordered champagne before I had even opened the menu. Madison laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his sleeve when she spoke, and introduced me to one of her co-workers as Ethan, my husband. He's in operations. Not the man who worked 60-hour weeks. Not the man who kept the house standing when her commissions dried up. Not the man who had covered her car payment, her credit card, her failed consulting project, and her mother's medical bills without ever throwing them in her face. Just operations. Like I was a department she didn't visit. I kept my hands folded beside my plate and watched the candlelight slide across my wedding ring. Then Blake leaned back, glass in hand, and said, "Come on, Ethan. Anniversary dinner, big night. Tell us your secret. How does a guy stay married to a woman this ambitious without holding her back?" The table chuckled. Madison didn't stop them. She smiled into her wine like she had been waiting for the question. Then she said it. Clear, casual, sharp enough to split the room in half. "Honestly, Ethan is dead weight. I've carried this marriage for years." For a second, the whole city went silent behind the glass. Then the table laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make the candle flame look unsteady. Enough to make the album in my pocket feel suddenly foolish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even look at Blake when he lifted his glass and said, "To Madison, for carrying what most women would have dropped years ago." I looked at my wife. Really looked at her. The perfect hair, the diamond earrings I had paid for, the smile she wore like armor, and behind it, the truth. She had not slipped. She had not misspoken. She had finally said out loud what she had been living quietly for years. The server arrived with another bottle, one Madison had ordered without asking, $1,200 of imported confidence sweating in a silver bucket. The bill folder from the first round already sat near the edge of the table, black leather, small and harmless, like a sealed verdict. Madison pushed it toward me with 2 fingers, the way she always did. The old Ethan would have taken it. The old Ethan would have paid, smiled tightly, driven home in silence, and spent the night telling himself marriage was about patience. But something in my chest went still. Not angry, not broken. Still. I picked up the folder, opened it, and looked at the numbers. Then I closed it again and placed it back in front of her. Madison's smile twitched. "Ethan," she said, soft warning in her voice. I took the napkin from my lap, folded it once, and set it beside my plate. "You called me dead weight," I said. My voice was calm enough that the nearest table stopped pretending not to listen. "So tonight, let's see what you can carry." Blake's grin faded before Madison's did. I reached into my wallet, placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal, my drink, tax, and a generous tip for a server who had done nothing wrong. Then I stood. Madison stared at me like the chair had moved by itself. "Are you serious right now?" she whispered. I slipped the leather album from my jacket pocket, looked at it once, and left it unopened beside the candle. 15 years of photographs. 15 years of proof that I had tried. "More serious than I've been in a long time," I said. Then I walked toward the elevator with the Chicago skyline burning behind me, and I did not turn around. But the thing Madison did not know, the thing none of them knew, was that the dinner bill was not the most expensive thing she was about to face. 48 hours before that elevator carried me away from the table, I had still been trying to save us. That is the part people never understand when a quiet man finally leaves. They think silence means weakness. They think patience means permission. They do not see the private attempts, the small repairs, the hope folded into ordinary gestures. On Wednesday afternoon, I left work early for the first time in months and drove through 3 suburbs to pick up the leather album Madison used to love, dark brown cover, thick cream pages, our names pressed into the corner in gold. I had spent 2 nights choosing the photographs. Madison barefoot in our first apartment, laughing because the kitchen sink had sprayed both of us. Madison asleep in the passenger seat during our road trip to Nashville, my old Ford loaded with gas station snacks and 1 suitcase between us. Madison standing on the porch of the house the day we got the keys, crying into my shoulder because she said it felt like the future finally had an address. I put those pictures in order like a man rebuilding a bridge 1 board at a time. Beside the album, I placed a handwritten letter. 3 pages. No accusations. No accounting of who had paid what. No list of lonely dinners or cold mornings. Just the truth as gently as I could write it. I told her I missed my wife. Not the polished woman who corrected my jacket before parties. Not the woman who smiled brighter for strangers than she did for me. But the woman who once ate takeout on moving boxes and called it a feast. I also booked a weekend at a small lake house in Wisconsin, 2.5 hours from Chicago, far enough from her office and my warehouse calls that maybe we could hear each other again. I imagined giving her the envelope after dessert. I imagined her face softening. I imagined a version of the night where we went home holding hands instead of holding our breath. Then, late Thursday, her text came through while I was standing in the garage, checking the tire pressure on her car because the dashboard light had been on for 3 days. Change of plans. I found a better restaurant. More our level. Also, Blake and a few others might join for a toast. I stared at the screen while the air pump hummed in my hand. More our level. Not more romantic. Not more private. More our level. I typed 3 different answers and erased all of them. In the end, I wrote, sounds fine. Because there is a kind of tired that looks exactly like cooperation. That night, Madison came home around 9:30, smelling like cold air and expensive perfume, her phone glowing in her hand. She barely glanced at the album box on the counter. What is that? She asked. Just something for tomorrow, I said. She nodded without interest and walked upstairs, already laughing at a message I could not see. I stayed in the kitchen long after the garage light clicked off by itself. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. There is a difference. Peace has warmth in it. This was just the absence of sound. I looked around at the granite counters, the stainless appliances, the framed travel prints Madison picked because she said they made us look cultured, and I realized how much of our marriage had become decoration. Pretty from a distance. Hollow when touched. Still, I told myself not to give up. 1 more dinner. 1 more honest conversation. 1 more chance for her to remember that I was not her enemy. I went to bed beside her that night with the lake house confirmation in my email and the letter folded inside my jacket pocket. I thought I was carrying hope. By the next evening, I would understand I had been carrying the last piece of a marriage she had already set down. The strange thing about contempt is that it rarely arrives all at once. It does not kick open the door wearing a name tag. It slips in quietly, 1 corrected sentence at a time. In the beginning, Madison loved that I was steady. She used to tell people I was the safest man she had ever known, and back then, she meant it like a compliment. I was the guy who showed up early, kept receipts, checked the oil before long drives, and made sure there was always enough in savings to survive a bad month. When she was building her marketing career, I was proud of her in a way that did not need witnesses. I packed her lunch when she had 6 in the morning presentations. I stayed up proofreading pitch decks I barely understood. I sat in parking lots outside conference hotels because she was nervous walking out alone after late events. I never thought of those things as sacrifices. I thought of them as marriage. Then her world got shinier. The lunches moved from sandwich shops to private clubs. Her coworkers stopped talking about clients and started talking about status. Watches, zip codes, vacation homes, who got invited where. Madison learned the language fast. She always was smart. That was one of the reasons I fell in love with her. But somewhere along the way, she started translating me into something smaller. At company gatherings, she stopped saying I managed regional operations for a logistics firm. She started saying, Ethan handles warehouse stuff. Warehouse stuff. Like 18 years of solving supply chain failures across 5 states could fit into 2 bored words. The first time she said it, I laughed it off. The second time, I felt it land. By the 10th, I just looked down at my glass and let the ice melt. She began choosing my shirts before dinners, then correcting my posture in elevators, then warning me not to get too technical if someone asked about work. People do not want details, Ethan, she would say, smoothing my collar like I was a display item placed wrong on a shelf. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself success changes the room around a person, not the person. That was a generous lie. Men like me are good at those. The worst part was not that Madison wanted more. Wanting more is not a crime. The worst part was that she needed me to become less so she could feel like she had risen. I watched it happen in small, polished moments. Her smile tightening when I mentioned a coupon. Her eyes moving away when I talked about fixing the dryer myself instead of calling a service. The little pause before she introduced me, as if she had to decide which version of me would embarrass her least. I still paid the mortgage every month. I still made sure her car insurance never lapsed. I still transferred money when her business card got declined after a client dinner she swore would be reimbursed. I did it quietly because I believed dignity meant not keeping score. But Madison was keeping a different kind of score, one measured in appearances, and I was losing a game I had never agreed to play. A year before that anniversary dinner, we had gone to a charity gala downtown. I wore the charcoal suit she picked. I stood beside her while she talked to executives and donors, smiling when appropriate, speaking only when spoken to. Near the end of the night, I overheard her tell Claire, "He is a good man, just not exactly impressive." Just not exactly impressive. 7 words. Soft voice. Clean cut. I carried them home like a stone in my coat pocket. That night, I brushed my teeth, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling while Madison slept beside me. I did not wake her. I did not ask for an apology. I just understood something I was not ready to admit. She was not ashamed because I had failed her. She was ashamed because the man who had kept her life steady did not sparkle under expensive lights. Blake Reynolds did not create the crack in my marriage. He just found it and leaned on it with a smile. Madison first mentioned him about 8 months before that anniversary dinner, during a Tuesday night, when I was reheating leftover chili and she was scrolling through her phone at the kitchen island. "Blake joined our strategy team," she said, like the name was just another office update. "He is intense, but he knows how to get attention in a room." I remember nodding while stirring the pot, not thinking much of it. New people came and went in her world all the time. Consultants, account managers, brand directors with perfect teeth and rented confidence. But Blake's name kept coming back. Blake said this. Blake thinks that. Blake knows a guy in Miami. Blake can get us into the private lounge at the Thompson. At first, I treated it like background noise. Then I started noticing the way Madison's voice changed around his name. Lighter, quicker, almost younger. Not romantic, exactly. Something more dangerous in a marriage that is already starving. Admiration. By winter, Blake had become a regular feature in our home without ever setting foot in it. His opinions sat at our dinner table. His jokes interrupted our evenings. His standards changed what Madison thought was acceptable. She started calling my old Ford embarrassing, even though it was paid off and ran fine. She suggested I should upgrade my watch, as if the time changed depending on the brand on your wrist. Once, while I was changing the air filter in the hallway, she stepped around the ladder and said, "Blake says successful men outsource small tasks." I looked down at her from the second step, holding a dusty filter in one hand, and said, "Successful men also know when $30 of work does not need a $200 invoice." She did not laugh. That was the new shape of us. I made sense. She wanted shine. Blake finally became real to me at a company mixer in River North. He shook my hand too hard, the kind of handshake men use when they think life is a contest no one announced. "Ethan, right?" he said, even though Madison had already introduced us twice. "The operations guy." There it was again, the smaller version. I smiled because I had spent years in conference rooms with louder men than him. "That is right," I said. "I help make sure things actually arrive where people promised they would." He blinked once, then grinned wider. "Practical. I like that." Madison laughed, but not with me. Around us, people held cocktails and spoke in polished little circles, the kind where every sentence was half conversation and half audition. Blake moved through them easily. Madison watched him like he was proof of a life she thought she deserved. That night on the drive home, I asked her if she noticed how he talked down to people. She stared through the windshield and said, "He is confident, Ethan. Not everyone is talking down just because they are comfortable being noticed." Comfortable being noticed. The words filled the car and pushed me into the passenger seat of my own marriage, even though I was the one driving. After that, Blake stopped being a coworker and became a measuring stick. Madison measured my clothes against his suits, my truck against his leased German sedan, my quiet against his performance. But the cruelest part was not Blake. It was Madison letting him stand where respect for her husband used to be. At the restaurant, when he raised his glass and asked what I brought to the table, I saw months of practice behind his smile. He had been waiting for an audience. Madison had given him one. I looked at the champagne, the skyline, the phones angled just enough to catch the moment, and I understood something clean and cold. He was not trying to humiliate me because he knew my worth. He was doing it because Madison had taught him I would tolerate it. And for a long time, she had been right. The folder was not created for revenge. That is what I need you to understand. It started because I was tired of being surprised by bills that had my name on them and choices that somehow became my responsibility after the fact. About 9 months before that dinner, I opened my laptop at 2 in the morning because Madison's business card had been declined at a hotel in Scottsdale, and the front desk needed a different payment method before she could check out. She called me from the lobby, voice low and irritated, like I had caused the embarrassment by not already knowing. I paid it. $682.40. Room, resort fee, parking, and a dinner she said was for client development. I did not argue. I just saved the receipt. The next week, the electric bill came in high, the mortgage drafted, and a notice arrived for her private line of credit. The one she told me was just temporary until her quarterly bonus landed. I paid that too. Then I made a folder on my desktop and named it Household Continuity because calling it Marriage Damage would have felt too honest. Inside went everything. Bank statements, credit card transfers, screenshots of text messages where Madison wrote, "Can you cover this month? I am a little tight, and I promise I will make it up later." Loan documents for her consulting project that never found clients but somehow needed a professional website, brand photography, a rented office, and 4 months of subscriptions she forgot to cancel. Her mother's medical payment plan, which I never regretted paying, but Madison later described to friends as something we handled, as if the money had appeared from the walls. There were emails too. One from Madison asking me to move money before a check bounced. One from the dealership thanking me for bringing her lease current. One from our accountant gently warning that Madison's write-offs were getting aggressive and we needed better records. I did not collect those things to punish her. I collected them because paper remembers what pride rewrites. Then came the house documents. That was the part Madison never liked to discuss. I had bought the place before we were married, back when the neighborhood was still affordable and the kitchen had yellow tile from the 1980s. Her name was added later for convenience after refinancing, but the down payment had come from my savings and a small inheritance from my father. 3 years ago, when Madison's side project started bleeding money, our attorney suggested a post-nuptial agreement to protect the house from business creditors. Madison signed it on a rainy Thursday without reading half of it, annoyed that paperwork was interrupting her spa appointment with Claire. The agreement was simple. Separate premarital equity remained separate. Personal debts stayed with the person who created them. Joint accounts would be divided by documented contribution. At the time, she rolled her eyes and said, "You and your safety nets." I smiled because that was what I did. I built safety nets. I just never imagined I would be the one who needed one. By the time Blake started using me as a punchline, the folder had grown heavy. Not physically, but I could feel its weight every time Madison called me unimpressive. There is a strange discipline in knowing the truth and not using it. Some nights, when she came home from another rooftop happy hour complaining that I did not understand ambition, I wanted to open that folder and turn the laptop toward her. I wanted to say, "Here is your ambition. Here is what it costs. Here is who keeps paying when the applause goes quiet." But I never did. Because once you have to prove your worth to someone who shares your last name, something has already broken. So I kept the folder updated. Quietly. Methodically. Like checking smoke detectors in a house where everyone else insists they do not smell anything burning. And on the night Madison pushed that restaurant bill toward me with 2 fingers, she thought she was asking me to pay for dinner. She had no idea she was asking me to ignore the whole folder one more time. By the time the second bottle reached the table, the restaurant had become a stage, and Madison was performing for people who did not know the price of the set. The skyline behind her glittered through the glass, blue and gold and cold, while the candle between us burned down into a soft pool of wax. She had relaxed into the attention, shoulders loose, smile bright, one hand wrapped around the stem of her wine glass like it was a microphone. Blake sat to her right, leaning back with the confidence of a man who had never been asked to clean up after his own charm. Claire was beside him, smiling carefully, the way people smile when they know a joke has gone too far but do not want to be the one who ends it. I remember the smell of roasted garlic, expensive cologne, warm bread, and the faint metal scent of rain-on coats hanging near the entrance. Everything was beautiful. That made it worse. Madison was telling a story about a conference in Denver where I had accidentally worn brown shoes with a black belt. She made it sound like I had walked into a boardroom wearing a costume. The table laughed. I looked at my water glass and watched the ice turn slowly. He just does not care about presentation, she said, tapping my wrist with 2 fingers like I was an example on display. That is Ethan. Practical to a fault. Blake grinned. There is practical, and then there is giving up. A few people chuckled again. Not loud. Just enough. The kind of laughter that does not fill a room, only hollows out the person it lands on. I felt the old reflex rise in me. Smooth it over. Protect her from the discomfort of what she had done. Pay the bill. Drive home. Sleep facing the wall. But this time, the reflex did not reach my hands. Madison kept going. She talked about how I still compared grocery prices, how I preferred road trips over first-class flights, how I once spent a Saturday repairing our back steps instead of hiring a contractor. I told him, Ethan, we are not 25 anymore, she said. We can afford to live a little. That was the line that almost made me laugh. We. Such a small word. Such a generous costume. Blake lifted his glass toward me. So what exactly do you bring to the table, Ethan? Besides responsible shoe choices and home repairs. There it was. The question wrapped in a joke, sharpened by months of permission. The table turned toward me. Madison watched too, not with concern, but curiosity, like she wondered whether I would finally embarrass myself. I looked at Blake, then at the plates, the champagne bucket, the appetizers no one finished, the phone screens glowing near folded napkins, the diamond earrings on my wife, the restaurant reservation made under my name, secured with my card. My voice came out even. Apparently, I said, the table. For half a second, nobody understood. Then Blake laughed, and the others followed because laughter is easier than thinking. Madison smiled with relief, believing I had taken my place again, the harmless husband making himself small so the evening could stay comfortable. But I was not making myself small. I was measuring the room. The server approached with the black leather bill folder from the bar portion and asked whether we wanted to keep the tab open for dinner. Madison answered before I could. Yes, of course, she said, waving one hand. It is a special night. Blake added another bottle, something French with a name he pronounced slowly, and Madison looked pleased, as if extravagance proved she belonged. I looked at the server's name tag. Victor. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, professionalized that had seen 1,000 private disasters unfold over dessert. He glanced at me for half a breath, and maybe he saw something steady in my face, because his expression changed. Not pity. Recognition. Madison leaned closer to Blake and said, just loud enough, do not worry. Ethan is good for it. That is his thing. That was the final thread. Not the insult. Not the laughter. That sentence. I was not her husband in that moment. I was her payment method. The candle flickered once. My chest went quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes before a door closes for good. Victor came back with the leather folder held flat against his palm, and for the first time all night, I noticed how small it looked. Strange, how something thin enough to slide under a door can carry the weight of an entire marriage. Madison was still smiling when he set it down near my plate. Not asking, expecting. That had always been the arrangement, spoken or not. She ordered the life. I absorbed the cost. Blake leaned back, already reaching for his glass. Big man moment, he said. Let us see if operations can operate a credit card. A couple of people laughed, but it came out weaker this time. Maybe they heard something in the air. Maybe they saw my hand resting still beside the folder. I opened it slowly. The numbers sat there in clean black ink. Bar tab. Appetizers. 2 bottles. The new bottle still unopened in its silver bucket. Steaks. Seafood. Desserts ordered in advance because Madison liked the drama of a full table. $4,816 before tip. I looked at the total, then at my wife. Her face had that polished patience she used with service workers and me, the expression that said she was allowing a delay but not approving it. I closed the folder. "Victor," I said. My voice did not rise. The restaurant seemed to lean closer anyway. "Would you please separate my portion from the rest of the table?" Madison blinked. "Just once." "Ethan, do not be ridiculous." I kept my eyes on Victor. He hesitated only long enough to confirm I meant it. "Of course, sir." Blake laughed again. Too loud now. A man trying to keep control of a joke that had started moving without him. "You are splitting checks at your own anniversary dinner?" I looked at him for the first time since the toast. "No, I am paying for what I ordered." The sentence landed softly. That made it worse. Madison's cheeks changed color beneath her makeup. "This is embarrassing," she whispered. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because embarrassment had finally entered the room when it touched her. Victor returned a minute later with a smaller receipt and a card reader. $43 for my meal, $8 for my iced tea, tax, and a tip large enough to thank him for his dignity. I paid in cash. Old habit. Clean ending. Madison stared at the bills on the tray like they were written in another language. "You are really doing this," she said. "No," I said, sliding the tray back to Victor. "I am done doing this." Then I took out my phone. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The banking app opened with my face identification, bright against the low restaurant light. Madison saw the screen and her posture stiffened. "What are you doing?" she asked. I tapped the card controls. There it was. Madison Carter, authorized user. The same card she used for lunches, client drinks, spa appointments, emergency purchases that were never emergencies. I looked at her, not to hurt her, but to make sure she understood the moment belonged to both of us. "You said I was something you had to carry," I said. "So I am setting down what was never mine to carry." I tapped freeze card. One small sound. Not even a sound, really. Just the faint glass click of my finger on the screen. But Madison heard it. Blake heard it. Claire stopped smiling completely. Madison's phone lit up beside her plate 2 seconds later. Transaction controls updated. Her eyes dropped to it, then snapped back to mine. The table went quiet in a way laughter never survives. "Ethan," she said, and for the first time that night, my name sounded less like a complaint and more like a warning to herself. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and picked up the leather album from beside the candle. For a moment, I almost left it there again. Then I thought of the younger version of us inside those pages, 2 people who had not yet learned how cruel comfort could become. I placed it in front of her. "You should keep this," I said. "It might help you remember when you still knew what I brought to the table." Her mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Blake looked at the bill folder as if it had personally betrayed him. I thanked Victor, turned toward the elevator, and walked away at the same pace I had walked into that restaurant. Behind me, Madison finally said my name loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. I did not turn around. The elevator doors opened, polished steel reflecting a man I barely recognized. Calm face. Tired eyes. No ring on his finger. As the doors closed, I saw Madison standing beside the table, one hand on the bill, surrounded by people who suddenly remembered they had wallets. And for the first time in years, I was not carrying the room. I drove out of downtown Chicago with the album no longer in my jacket and my phone buzzing so often it felt like a trapped insect in the cup holder. Madison called first, then texted, then called again. I did not answer, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I knew the old rhythm too well. She would start with outrage, move into embarrassment, soften into apology, then somehow leave me explaining why I had hurt her by reacting to what she did. I had spent years walking that circle. That night, I took the exit toward Oak Brook, checked into a business hotel near the interstate, and parked beneath a broken light at the far end of the lot. The room smelled like clean sheets and air conditioning. Nothing personal, nothing shared. I set my keys on the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder. Household continuity. The name looked almost polite now. I made 3 copies. One to an external drive. One to encrypted cloud storage. One to an email account Madison did not know existed. Paper trail beats performance. By 11:40, her messages had changed shape. This is humiliating. Blake had to cover part of it. Claire thinks you overreacted. You embarrassed me in public. I read that last one twice. Public. The word sat there, shiny with hypocrisy. She had humiliated me in public and called it honesty. I had drawn a boundary in public, and she called it cruelty. I placed the phone face down. Then I logged into every account that still had my name attached to her convenience. The authorized card was already frozen. I removed automatic payments for her boutique gym, her personal shopping subscription, the premium rideshare account, the storage unit she used for seasonal decorations she forgot existed, and the vacation rental deposit for a girl's weekend she had booked without mentioning the balance would hit our joint account. I did not touch necessities. I did not cancel health insurance. I did not empty the checking account. I left more than her exact contribution in the joint fund and moved my separate income to the account where it should have been going all along. Clean lines. No drama. Just math. At 6:15 the next morning, Madison discovered gravity. Her first call came while I was drinking hotel coffee from a paper cup near the window. Then another. Then a text in all capital letters because panic always forgets grammar. My card declined at breakfast. What did you do? 2 minutes later. The car lease payment did not go through. Ethan, answer me. Then, did you cancel the Wisconsin place? That one made me pause. She had found the lake house confirmation, the last piece of hope I had packed for her. I almost answered. My thumb hovered over the screen long enough for the coffee to stop steaming. Then a new message arrived. You are acting insane over one joke. There it was. One joke. 15 years reduced to a punchline with a receipt attached. I opened my email instead. At 9:12, my attorney, Daniel Mercer, sent the first formal letter. Legal separation. Temporary financial boundaries. Preservation of records. Review of post-nuptial agreement. Professional words. Calm words. The kind that do not bleed, but still change the room. Madison called again at 9:17. I let it ring. At 10:30, Daniel called me. His voice was steady, older, unhurried. Ethan, she received the notice. Her attorney has not responded yet. Do not argue by text. Do not explain. Do not meet alone if emotions are high. Let the documents speak. I looked out at the interstate, at commuters moving east and west like nothing in the world had shifted. I am tired of explaining, I said. Daniel was quiet for a second. Then stop. Simple advice. Almost merciful. By noon, Madison's tone changed again. She sent a photograph of the album open on our first apartment picture. Remember us? Below it, another message. I did not mean it that way. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and stared at the two younger people in that photo. We looked poor and exhausted and happy. We had a card table for a dining room and a couch from a clearance warehouse, but her hand was on my shoulder like I was home. I wanted to feel anger. Instead, I felt grief, quiet and heavy, the kind that does not shout because it has already accepted the truth. I typed one sentence and sent it before I could soften it. You meant it enough to say it where it would hurt most. Then I turned off notifications, zipped the external drive into my work bag, and stood up. For the first time in years, my day belonged to me. 3 weeks later, I saw Madison again in the lobby of Daniel Mercer's office, and for the first time in years, she looked like someone who had run out of mirrors. No sharp smile, no perfect posture, no audience arranged around her to make her feel powerful. Just a gray coat, tired eyes, and the leather album pressed against her chest like it was heavier than paper. I arrived 10 minutes early because that is who I am. She was already there because fear can make people punctual too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The receptionist typed quietly behind the glass partition. Outside, Chicago moved through a cold Friday morning. Horns in the distance, shoes clicking on wet pavement, everybody carrying something no one else could see. Madison stood when I walked in. Ethan, she said. My name sounded careful now, like a dish she had dropped once and was afraid to touch again. I nodded. That was all I had in me. She looked down at the album. I went through every page. Her voice thinned on the last word. I forgot how much you did. That sentence should have felt like justice. It did not. It felt late. She stepped closer, stopping far enough away to prove she had learned at least one boundary. I was embarrassed, she said. Not because of you. Because I thought I had to look like I had outgrown where we started. Blake and those people, they made everything feel like a competition. I let it get in my head. I listened. Calmly. Not coldly. There is a difference. Cold means you want someone to hurt. Calm means you are no longer willing to bleed for their lesson. She wiped under one eye with her thumb and gave a small, broken laugh. He did not even pay his full part that night. Blake argued over the wine after you left. I almost smiled, but not enough for it to reach my face. Of course he did. Men like Blake love a table until the check arrives. Madison looked at me then, really looked, without the old impatience. I am sorry, she said. For the dinner. For the jokes. For making you feel small when you were the only reason my life felt safe enough for me to chase more. The words landed. They mattered. They just did not rebuild what they had broken. Daniel opened the conference room door and said we could come in. Before we did, Madison touched the album cover once. Is there any version of this where we start over? She asked. The hallway went quiet around us. I thought about our first apartment, the yellow kitchen light, her hand on my shoulder, the woman who once called me home. Then I thought about the restaurant, the laughter, the bill sliding across white linen like it already knew my place. I took a slow breath. I do not hate you, Madison, I said. But I cannot live in a marriage where respect has to disappear before someone notices its value. She closed her eyes. No scene. No begging. Just the sound of a truth finally reaching the floor. The separation moved forward cleanly after that. The post-nuptial agreement held. Her personal debt stayed hers. The house remained protected. We divided what was truly joint, and for once, the numbers told the story without being asked to soften it. Claire sent me one message 2 months later. She said Blake had been transferred to another office after losing a major client, and that Madison had stopped attending those rooftop gatherings. I did not answer. Some doors do not need to be slammed. They only need to stay closed. By spring, I moved into a smaller place near the river. Nothing impressive, nothing Madison would have posted online. Just brick walls, morning light, a kitchen table that seated two but did not feel empty with one. On Saturday mornings, I walked to a diner 3 blocks away where the waitress learned my coffee order by the second visit. Black, 2 refills, eggs over medium, wheat toast. Simple things. Mine. One morning, rain streaked the window while traffic hissed along the curb, and I caught my reflection in the glass. Older than I felt. Calmer than I expected. Free in a way that did not announce itself. I thought about that night, about the laughter, about the folder, about the small click of a frozen card. People asked later if leaving her with the check was revenge. It was not. Revenge wants applause. I wanted silence. I wanted the space to hear myself again without someone translating my dignity into weakness. That night, I walked away from a table where I had been treated like a bill someone else deserved not to pay. But the truth was, I had been paying for her contempt for years. And when I finally stopped, everything that was not built on respect came due.